Welcome to Ronin Brothers. Let's talk about it. This is episode 1. We're going to go over subjects that probably are questions you've had over the years, why we do things the way we do them, and we're just going to sit and kind of have a shop discussion. I'm Aaron. This is Brendan. You might remember me from such films as insert here. I don't know. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about, do I need a tune? Because very common question. A lot of people don't know what a tune truly is versus maybe what it used to be in the 1960s and even the 1990s, 2000s, 2010s, and today. What a tune is has definitely changed. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's a fair point, man, especially when you consider tuning in the past was always, all right, carburetors, jets, idle air mixtures, all right, advancing your timing. I mean, depending on what sort of distributor you had, it could be as simple as a mechanical advancement onto that one. Hey, my base timing is now X, Y, or Z. Or hey, it's got a counterweight in there and it's based on RPM, and that'll advance your timing or reduce it. So even though that is old school tuning now, right? Not something that's normally done unless you're dealing with an older car. It's still basically, in some rudimentary form, the same concept, the same principles of what you do today with a laptop.
Yeah. Tuning with a typewriter, though,
Right.
not a laptop.
So you do also remember Aaron from Willy Wonka and the Tuning Factory. It was really big in India, not so much in the United States, but
Yeah, it never caught on.
no, never caught on. But if you don't know who this guy is, then you don't know much in the tuning world. Not a fair statement to say, but Aaron O'Neill and his pedigree and his history in the tuning community is huge. Known in some circles as Dr. Evo. We call him Dr. Evil in here because he breaks our hearts every time we're like, hey, we're done bolting this on, now make way more horsepower than it should. And he brings us back to reality pretty quick. But absolutely one of the best tuners, the only man that has ever touched any vehicle I've ever owned, and why it was an easy choice when we were talking about putting together this performance shop, that he had to be a part of this. The days of just a mechanic shop that says, hey, throw this turbo on or throw these parts on, and that's all that you do, are gone. And if you're still operating under that market premise, you're not as effective as you should be. Having in-house tuning is essential anymore, because on cars like the C8 behind me, you can bolt on almost anything that you want. And we're going to get into this a little bit later in this video, but just because you bolt it on and just because right now you feel increase in power or increase in torque doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be there 6 months from now or even 2 weeks from now, based on what the ECU is telling, or what the ECU is reading and it's telling it to release for power. But we will get into that. So we talked a little bit about early tuning methodology, and I don't think that neither one of us really want to go into carb tuning. Still applicable depending on what chassis, what platform you have, but you are in 2025.
Yeah, we have sensors on everything. And most people, that if you ever grew up around a carbureted anything, let's say muscle car, your gauges were you had water temp, voltage, and oil pressure. And that's pretty much it. But we know that that's not it. We have throttle position, we have manifold pressure. Obviously, we're going to have coolant temp. Sometimes we have oil temp, we have oil pressure. Now, modern cars such as the C8, a lot of cars since probably 2006, 2007. Earlier in the case of some Volkswagen Audi stuff, you have a wideband air fuel sensor built in. You don't need an extra gauge to know what's going on because that's something that's there. So, tuning with the typewriter versus today, we have a lot more that we're going to see as we tune, in addition to a lot more that we have to tune.
So you brought something up, right? Modern ECUs has got signals inside of them, right? Sensors that are sending them data that can be utilized and that can be modified for the factory ECU. Now, you have open source out there where you've got the ability on like Evos and certain cars that you can go in and you can directly flash the factory ECU and make the changes you want to make. But there's also a subset of stuff out there like the Cobb products that go for STIs and a bunch of different chassis and platforms. And we got into a debate about this a little bit earlier, whether that is a piggyback or is it a signal interrupt, or how do you define like a Cobb system?
So I like to think of those. You'll have like Cobb for quite a lot of Japanese applications and Ford as a domestic. You have ECU Tech. Everybody knows HP tuners. You have not so much that I see it anymore. You used to have Diablo. You have SET. I call those an interface device, and the reason I call them that is because you're using software to tune the stock ECU. That part hasn't changed. But instead of open source, where you kind of have to define everything, these companies have built a device to plug into the OBD2. Usually they have their own software package, and the laptop goes to that, then that flashes the ECU. So I don't necessarily think of those as a piggyback so much as, it's just a pass through, I guess would be another term for it.
Okay, that makes sense to it. Yeah, because you added HP tuners to that, like that's what got me thinking about it. It's like, all right, so the Cobb interface device that they have is legitimately just a way to flash the ECU. It's not, you go back to SAFCs, right?
Yeah.
Or any of the Apexi products they used to make back in the day that all of us that are into JDM land had stacked inside of our cars.
Gritty E-Manage.
Right. Like all of those took a signal.
E-Manage, if you were being classy.
It took the signal and it modified it and it sent it back to the ECU, telling it, "Hey, my air ratio is this, right? Or my density is this, my temperature is this," in order to get the ECU to tell or to fire the injectors, more duration, more fuel, or whatever, or advance or retard timing.
Mm-hmm.
So it would lie to the ECU to get it to where it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas the products now, like the Cobb and the HP tuners, that doesn't do that. We're actually redefining what should be at that section of the map.
Yeah, exactly. So whether it's open source, Cobb, HP tuners, we'll just kind of keep it to those three. You still have a 3D map. You're going to have RPM. You're going to have load, whether that's boost or versus TPS or whatever. So you got a 3D map where if you had a DSM or a Honda or Nissan and you put the SAFC in it, that's very two-dimensional because you're just changing values versus maybe MAF voltage or map sensor. It's tied into the coils, so maybe somehow you're changing ignition timing. SAFC wouldn't do that because it was a super air fuel converter. So it was only changing fuel, but because it was changing that load, it was actually also changing timing because it might think it's less load or more load. So as an unfortunate byproduct that wasn't very controllable, you'd get more than the one, which is why people used to say, "Oh, rich is safe," because you're adding all this fuel in, which makes the load higher, which makes the timing less. So it wasn't that the fuel was making it safe; it was the fact that you were actually pulling timing without realizing it, which we didn't know for a long time till we could data log, and we were getting some feedback from those onboard sensors. Even though it was primitive, we were getting something we could see.
So in the case of like the C8 behind us, HP Tuners has cracked the ECU. They've had it for the last few years. We're able to go in and we're make modifications to it. I guess my question really is that the right route that an owner should be looking at for what may be major modifications of the vehicle, or should we be looking at a standalone?
I think that kind of depends on, one, how you're going to use the car. If it's a street car, it's hard to take something that's had tens of millions of dollars in research applied to it. In this case, the factory ECU, everything that it does, and just replace it. If you were going to go really crazy and be more on the spectrum of a race car, I think standalones definitely have a lot of advantage. But I'm going to qualify that by saying what I would do for a 2023 or 2015 is probably going to be way different than if I had a 1994 Honda Civic, because that ECU is very, very primitive. It really can't do much. And so getting rid of that stock ECU, there's big benefit to a standalone because you're going to modernize it. You're not dealing with something that's 30 years old and has a file size of 8 kilobytes. Where a lot of modern stuff, I don't know about the C8 specifically, but a lot of modern stuff is 2 megabytes and 4 megabytes. So you have, like, my Explorer ST is a 2 megabyte or 2.2 megabyte file. So, I mean, there's a lot in there where standalones are nice because it's always going to be live tuning. it allows you to basically do what you can imagine. Uh, but the stock ECU, if you're really only changing some basic things, even though maybe you went from 300 horse to 600 horse, standalone is probably overkill for some people.
Okay.
But again, it depends on what your stock ECU you're starting with. I mean, if you have an Atari 2600 and expect it to act like an Xbox, 360, it's night and day difference, right? So
So you're talking about resolution of maps, though, like
yeah,
the inputs that you can put in, how the ECU is seeing it,
how fast it can do something with it,
right?
what
Or react
safeties it
to it.
has, yeah,
So
what can it control? I mean, a lot of stock ECUs back in the 90s, they didn't have drive-by-wire.
yeah,
We actually add drive-by-wire to stuff now because you get cruise control, you get better idle control, you can do some really crazy things with it as far as safeties. Like Ford at factory, if it overboosts, will chop throttle. Well, I can do that in a standalone. So I can't do that in Honda. I can't do that with an open source Evo or open source STI. Well, I guess an STI is drive-by-wire factory, but um, your control factor just isn't there. So
so it's multifaceted. It's not
yeah,
just a direct answer of no, you need a standalone, or no, you should do your factory ECU tuning. A lot of it has to do with where you want the car to go, how much
sure.
power you want it to have, and then
Hmm.
probably most importantly, what ECU are we working with when we get there? Now, I'm old school. Like I told you, I've known Aaron for a very long time now, and when
Almost
we
20 years.
yeah, when we started hanging out and started wrenching together, I always focused on the mechanical aspect of it. I like turning a wrench. I like sitting there and yanking parts, getting dirty. And he focused very heavily on tuning even back then, and which is where his direction takes him. Not to say he's not a fantastic wrench, without a doubt. The guy teaches me something every single day. But uh, I like to stay on this side of it. And so when I bring this up, like I think of tuning as just basically two segments. I think of fuel and I think of timing. But it's not the case when we're talking anything really. And I keep pointing to the
Yeah,
C8, but it's just behind me. But almost any car at this point has got so many sensors that are bringing in information and
yeah.
data. And you need to have an understanding of all of those sensors, the inputs that it's providing it in order to get the tune where it needs to be. Can you kind of go into that a little bit?
Sure. I think we should maybe go back to starting. I mean, we can pick on standalones a little bit, but even back, in the 90s, that's more or less what they were doing. Air fuel, that is, spark. Maybe you were going to do boost if it was a turbo car, and that was what you were controlling. But that's really all that you had. I guess Honda had VTEC, so you might have a high
VTEC.
side output to switch the cam, right? And that's what you were going to tune. Um, but with new cars, and starting with a lot of Japanese cars in the early 2000s, you started adding variable valve timing. Even the C8, it's a pushrod motor. It has variable valve timing. You can do stuff with it that you couldn't with a normal LS or old small block or old big block. Um, so when you're tuning cam timing, that is affecting how much air is getting into the motor and when it's doing that, which is going to affect your fuel map. Maybe because you have X amount of advance on that cam, this part of the fuel map is going to be used, where when you don't have any of that, you're going to be in a different spot. If you have a boosted car, you have to take care of the timing as it goes into boost and wide open throttle. A lot of people think of tuning and they only ever talk about wide open, but you have so much in between. 99% of your tune is idle and driving because that's what most people do.
Yeah.
We're not so lucky that we can floor it everywhere, and be full throttle.
That'd actually be a good video in the future, is to talk about the selection of parts. Right, everybody
Sure.
likes seeing the high horsepower output that this cam makes or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
but they never really sit down and look and say, well, that's being produced at 7,500 RPM, and your car lives at 2,500 to 4,500
Exactly.
RPM 90% of your driving time. They wonder why, hey, I put in this cam and now it kind of sucks.
Which is a good plug for a term that we use, a build consultation. So you want more horsepower. This separates, I think, a lot of shops from knowing what they're doing and just being able to bolt on parts, because a lot of people can bolt on parts, but when you have a specific goal and how you want to use a car, that's where you need to talk to somebody where there is an in-house tuner.
Yeah.
um, because I can tell you right away what's possible and what's not with with a lot of hardware because I understand how the hardware works too. Um, like you said, a giant cam isn't going to idle nice. It's not going to drive nice. You're going to lose fuel economy. If it's your daily driver, those are things that you don't want. So a build consultation, even if you pay a little bit of money for it, it's worth it in the end if you're not doing things twice or
Yeah,
three times.
parts aren't cheap.
Well, in labor, right? If you're going to a shop that charges you every time that they look at your car, and you picked the wrong parts and they didn't know better and just bolted them on,
Yeah,
you know,
drivability sucks. I mean,
yeah,
it's fantastic on a drag strip maybe, but
sure,
if you don't drag the car, kind of what's the point of it? Well, types of tune, man. So you can tune a car, obviously in person and physically. Do you have the
sure.
capability for remote tuning?
Most certainly. I remote tune lots of cars. My last shop I worked at, that was one thing that I was known for. We got away from it for the most part because we started finding that there were a lot of shops that didn't prepare cars correctly or the customers didn't understand the process. But remote tuning is definitely, when we help walk you through it, remote tuning is a great avenue. Um, In-person tuning is even better because then I can look at it, I can hear it, I can smell it, I can see it. You know, whether it's on a dyno or just sitting in the parking lot, that gives me a lot more capability to maybe diag things that are wrong or, you know, unwanted side effects that maybe even we didn't anticipate. Now I can see it. Now I know what it's doing.
Right. Well, and that brings up, right? We've had multiple Evo 10s come on in
Mm-hmm.
with very similar modifications that are on it. And the differences in even the fuel injector manufacturer and the quality of the fuel injector and
The
what
age
it's
of the
doing.
injector.
Yeah, and the age of the injector and what it's done whenever for a tune that, like, all intents and purposes, those tunes should be very similar. I mean, they're bespoke, they're built for that
Yeah.
car, they're built for what's going on exactly in that car, but they react differently, at least initially, until you have a chance to physically go through it, feel what you're feeling, and not just read a data file that's sent to you on remote. So if you could do it any way you wanted to, preferred method in person.
In person on a dyno, of course.
Okay.
I mean, that to me, it's very hard to beat that because number one, I get to talk to you as a customer and say, you know, what are your goals? We can do that via email, but you know, I find, and this isn't, you know, pointing fingers or trying to make anybody feel bad, but I find that in email, it's everybody is kind of afraid to get their hand caught in the cookie jar. And so you're not going to tell me that you go to Mexico a lot. You know, Mexico apparently has a giant street racing problem, from all reports.
I did not know.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm surprised about that as well. And so you don't always hear that, hey, I'm going to use this car hard every day. And instead you get told, oh, it's a daily driver. I might autocross or I might go to the drag strip. Um, where if I talk to you long enough, we're going to have something in common and you're going to tell me what you're doing. And, you know, I don't care if you drive to Mexico. That's fine. You know, the roads go every direction. Go do that. But I'm going to tune the car appropriately.
Right.
You know, if you say, hey, this car only goes to a road course and it comes in on a trailer, it has no license plates, it has slicks on it, and all the aero, it's like I'm going to tune that car differently because I understand that circuit driving is a completely different set of variables on the engine because it's going to go for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe longer at full throttle, or use a lot of that power band where it's not just the 1% or 2% at wide open throttle. It's everything has to work in between as well. You can't have dead spots. The
Right.
car has to have good manners everywhere. Autocross would be similar, kind of maybe more drag strip power, but it needs to be drivable in two gears. Um,
So I get a lot of customers that'll
mhm,
call up that have issues from tuning, and sometimes it is from remote tuning, and
mhm,
it doesn't do everything that they're looking for. Like, hey, it dies on me, or it wants to stall out whenever I go to Chick-fil-A and I'm stuck in the drive-through and stuff like that.
gotcha.
A lot of that could have probably been handled if it had been either in person or clearly defined on the use of the vehicle. Not saying all tuners are created equal. There's absolutely bad tuners out there that are just
Yeah.
operating off somebody else's tune and modifying it the way they think is appropriate.
Well, and there's not a lot of people that have 20 years of on site, on hand experience either.
That's true.
So if you give me a car, and we'll use JDM because that is a lot of my last 20 years. Um, you tell me what it's doing, or I see something in a log. Chances are I've experienced that in person already, so I can look at something and say, hey, I think this happened. A great one is Mitsubishi Evolutions don't have clamps or zip ties on vacuum lines, and it's really easy, especially over time, that the EGR vacuum line will pop off. Well, when it does that, that valve blows open, and you have hot exhaust going back into the intake manifold, and it makes the engine knock right around 6,000 RPM. And it's always a lot of knock because obviously that's really high temp. We don't want that. And if I have everything else equal, I know the air fuel's good. I know what the timing map should look like. As an example, I could see, oh, hey, it's knocking at 6,000. I bet your EGR line fell off. Let it cool down, stick your hand up under the intake manifold and put it back on with a zip tie.
Yeah.
Um, you're not going to have a lot of remote tuners that do that because they don't have a shop. They've never worked in a shop. A lot of remote tuners start off as a hobbyist working on their own car. They get really good about tuning their own car and they start doing other people's, and that's fine. But they didn't work on these things day in, day out for
Yeah,
18
without
years
having
or
a
20
mechanical
years.
background to go with it, it's going to make it harder to diagnose something, and you may be chasing your own tail around for a while,
Yeah,
working on something that's a mechanical issue, not necessarily a tune issue.
exactly. I mean,
Okay.
and you can have bad sensors. It's really common because a lot of sensors come from China that your wideband is bad out of the box. I'm not going to name names of manufacturers that do that, but it's common enough that when you tell me, hey, my wideband says this, and I look at in an Evo the front O2 sensor, or a Subaru, I look at the milliamps for the O2. It's like, oh well, you have that brand of gauge, don't you? Because your gauge is wrong. So go down to AutoZone and buy a Bosch 17025 or a Bosch 17205, depending on the gauge. Plug it in and let's try this again. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, yeah, it's not a 10.0 air fuel, it's a 12.0 air fuel. Again, experience, right?
Yeah.
On in person versus
Yeah. No,
purely remote.
having the mechanical background, having the history
Yeah.
that you've got makes a lot of that a whole lot easier. Now, you and me have both tuned, and I say me, I'm the driver, he's the tuner.
But that's teamwork.
Yeah, teamwork. So you and me have both tuned on the street
Mm-hmm.
as well as on the dyno.
Mm-hmm.
So which do you prefer? And then is there instances where no, it absolutely needs to be one or absolutely needs to be the other?
I prefer both. I like to do all of the big stuff and as much drivability as I can on a dyno. A dyno jet, as an example, makes that really, really easy. I'm sure a lot of dynos do this. You can just drive at a steady state, vary the throttle, maybe get in spots that you wouldn't normally, 6,000 RPM, but part throttle. And what my normal program is I will do that while I'm making the wide open poles. Pardon me. So that I'm doing two things at once. Once all of the dyno stuff is done, I definitely like to take the car out on the street because then I'm going to check idle coming to a stop with the AC on, the AC off. We're going to drive it down the road. We're going to check cruise, light throttle tip in, things that you're never going to get on a dyno. We're going to go up a hill. You know, then you make a quick hit, maybe a second to third gear, obviously in Mexico again. It's a long commute, but we put forth the effort.
Yeah, from Tennessee.
Yeah, it's a long drive, but
Yeah.
we're good. To double check it, because things that you will find different on the dyno, you don't have as much fan, so all the temps under hood are hotter. So it usually takes more wastegate duty cycle to get X amount of boost. On the street, it's the exact opposite. You have aerodynamic load, and you have a bunch of cold air going through your intercooler. So it takes a lot less, and it's nice to check that because you don't want somebody over boosting, as soon as they
Absolutely.
leave and hit boost cut, and then they question your capabilities because they're like, hey, it was great on the dyno, and now it doesn't drive right. So you want to double check it. And I think there are times where dyno 100% isn't where you want to throw a car, and typically that's if maybe it's something that we tuned months ago, years ago. The car comes back, oh, I have this problem. Well, throwing it on a dyno is great for our checkbook, but not necessarily what you need, because I might not be able to replicate the problem. Because maybe it is going up a hill. Maybe it's shifting between gears with that load. So sometimes you just got to go straight to the street to get
Right.
the car to do what it's doing.
Where the car lives 100% of the time.
Exactly, because the dyno won't replicate, a lot of that unless you live on a, section of geography that's perfectly flat everywhere.
Now,
Which, I mean, could be.
most dynos. So we've recently invested 6 figures into a mainline hub dyno that it's based on our last email from the guys, fully assembled,
So close to
tested,
being here.
and now being shipped all the way from Australia.
Yeah.
When we get it to here, if I remember right from what they were telling us, it's supposed to give us awful lot of controllability when it comes to load up against a vehicle. It's supposed to be able to provide us an opportunity to read ECUs in a different way than we would normally be able to do it.
Yeah, directly logged to the dyno.
Right, with CAN capability already built into it. So with that dyno, do you think there's ever a time, I mean, we're being sold a lot. We'll see what we get whenever it arrives, but if it does live up to its reputation, does that take street, like, still going to be there, but does that take it farther away from a necessity?
I don't think so.
So we could have spent less money.
Great. Well, all dynos cost about the same. If you guys don't know this, most dynos are going to start, the least expensive all-wheel drive dyno that I'm aware of is about $103,000 right now for properly equipped. Hub dynos go up to 120. We didn't have to pay quite that much because we bought a show special, but still, it's a big investment as a tool, right? But the things that you're still going to run into are the main line. We can vary the load, so theoretically, I guess we could simulate the hill. I know that it has a quarter-mile drag race mode that takes into account coefficient of drag, frontal area, so it simulates the aerodynamic load. That's going to be really cool to play with. Maybe we'll have to buy 2 dynos, and then in the winter we can drag race.
Yeah, with all that extra money we got laying around.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna have to sell my car.
I'm going to have to sell a kidney.
All right, so when we started this video, I'd said we were going to come back to it, and now I
Sure.
kind of want to hit it real here since we're near the end of the thing. So I go and I invest, I don't know, a couple $1,000s in an exhaust system, right, and intake, and start trying to wake the car on up. And I noticed that as soon as I bolt it on and I drive it, it feels really good. I can feel it in the ass dyno that there was benefits to me and to the car. Over a long enough duration of time, let's call it a month, 2 months, I don't feel it as much. Am I getting desensitized to the horsepower, or is the ECU learning that it has increased airflow and modifying the maps to put it back where its target is?
Okay, so my grandpa used to say that your car is going to be slow after 30 days. Actually, he didn't, but I'll attribute it to him, because you do get used to horsepower. That is the thing. And in the case of a C8, let's say you bolt on the exhaust and they say it's 20 horsepower, and you have the really good intake system and they say that's 25 horsepower. Okay, cool, I should have 45. That's 10%. You're going to notice that. If the car starts feeling slow again, 99.9% of the time in a modern car, especially the C8, a lot of the German stuff, even my Ford, which is using a Bosch ECU, so more or less Euro. It's because they're torque based, and they do a lot of really awesome calculations to know that this car's supposed to make 480 pound-feet of torque. You'll never hear anybody with an ECU say horsepower management, because that doesn't exist. But if you have on your car, the torque request says 480 pound-feet of torque, you might get by that for a little while before the ECU is like, oh, hey, he's having too much fun. And now instead of 100% throttle, you're getting 60% throttle or 70% throttle to maintain that 480 pound-feet of torque that it's requesting at all times.
Okay.
So you still have the sound. You just don't have any of the extra fun.
Right. Not awesome.
No, not awesome.
All right. So the ECU tuning, when you're adding parts on more modern vehicles, it's required. Otherwise, the ECU can learn past it. Now I go back to like my FD days, right? you add an intake and exhaust on an FD without tuning to go with it, you're asking to smoke your motor.
Exactly.
Like things are going to get bad really, really, really quick.
It's going to lean it out and it's going to go boop.
Right. Apex seal, super fun.
Yes.
So you've got some mechanical requirements for tuning. You know, if we're adding boost to a naturally aspirated engine, or we're adding a whole bunch of horsepower, or to get all of the horsepower that a part's capable of providing for you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Those requirements that exist. And then now there's another requirement that's into it. It's just your car is modern enough to know what it should be putting out. And when you've increased its capacity for horsepower and torque to the point that it can make more, it's going to limit you to put it back into the box of where it wants you to be. So we need tuning in order to get out of that box and actually start getting the horsepower and performance we're looking for.
Yeah. So then that's, you know, coming to the name of this particular episode, do I need a tune? If you have a new car, yes. If you're putting parts on it, you need a tune. Most cars leave a lot on the table. And if you want to unlock that, you need a tune. You know, we were talking about Jaden's 2019 Q7. With just a tune, it's rated at 329 horsepower and the tune's 447. It's a great example of a torque request change, and I'm sure additional stuff. But primarily, that's going to be the foundation there, is you're asking it to make more torque, so it does. And because it's torque times RPM divided by 5252, voila, we have more horsepower.
Yeah, I mean, that's the first thing that came to mind when you started doing math.
Exactly.
I was like, hey, he's talking about horsepower, 100%.
Yeah. You know, a lot of turbo cars. Look at the B58s, the S58s, and the BMWs, the Nano V6 and a lot of the Fords, the Raptor 3.5. You know, just picking these as examples because I'm familiar with them. They'll make 340 horsepower to the wheels on a dyno jet, stock tune. That's what they do on pump gas. They have enough turbo to make over 500.
And you're telling me fuel injectors too, right?
Yeah, fuel system. You know, we commonly will use an ethanol blend, you know, because it's cheap race gas. But if you were on race gas or you had the capability of pump fuel that didn't knock, I mean, on E40, a stock fuel system in an Explorer or a Raptor as an example, there's enough for 515, 520 wheel. So on straight gas, you know, whether it was race gas, 110 unleaded or whatever, you might have 600 horse.
Wow.
For a car that's only making 340. And they do that to make sure that the turbos are as efficient as possible, so the heat load is as low as possible, so that you can go 100,000 miles because they don't want to have warranty problems. So
that makes sense.
They're trying to make it efficiency. Exactly.
Yeah.
Or you take an S58 BMW that I think is rated at 560 horsepower at the crank, a little bit of ethanol. Those stock turbos can do 770 horsepower to the wheels. So, you know, another example of massive over-engineered and detuned for that reliability, where you don't change many parts and the tune just wakes the car up.
And speaking of which, we're going to do another video here in the upcoming months after the mainline dyno shows on up, because Aaron's talked me into changing the C8 just from pump gas 93 over to E85 to see what sort of performance gains we can get with that. And there's a little bit on the install. It's not just as simple as throw E85 in the tank and let it rip, paint or chip, but there is an awful lot that we're going to be able to show on that, and naturally aspirated horsepower production on it. So definitely want you to stay tuned. Appreciate you checking out on this one. Stick with us here at Ronin Brothers Performance. We're going to show you some cool things. Thanks a lot.
Talk to you later.